Hello, my name is Danny Wilson. Will you come dancing with me at the Winter Carnival? I looked up from my prepared speech and looked around the pews in the crowded St. James Church. I could easily see the confusion on the faces of most of those present. However, the people closest to me have heard the story of how we met many times. These people had big smiles and tears in their eyes. When a moan sob escaped the lips of my youngest daughter, Julia, everyone present realized that there was more to this story. 42 years ago, I was a nerd in high school. My friends called me BP, Beanpole, as I was 185 centimeters tall and weighed 65 kilograms. I had long, greasy blonde hair and a pimply face. I wasn't shy about girls. They scared me to death. Perhaps the only good thing I had was that I was good at math and science. I mean, really good. Danny Wilson was a sophomore at the time. She was a tall and athletic girl and played soccer and basketball in a support group. She was a good student, was popular, and participated in many extracurricular activities. I was surprised when Miss Long came to our table in the school cafeteria. She looked at me and said, "When the bell rings announcing the end of the school day, I want you to stay here." Turning to Billy Wolf and John Shepard, she ordered, "Both of you will leave this place when the bell rings." As she was leaving, John asked, "What the hell did you do?" I shrugged and replied, "I didn't do shit." Billy and John started running when the bell rang. I was annoyed when I couldn't find Miss Long. I noticed Danny Wilson enter the cafe shortly after the bell rang. She seemed to stop at every table to say a few friendly words to everyone she passed. I was stunned when she came out from behind the table 2 seats away from mine. She came over to me, pulled out a chair, and sat down. She said, "Hello, my name is Danny Wilson. Will you come dancing with me at the Winter Carnival?" I still can't remember if I spoke to her. I suspect my eyes have widened. I suspect I smiled broadly. I know I nodded my head vigorously. Danny clapped her hands and said, "I'm so happy. I was very worried asking you about it. There are 6 weeks left before the dance. I'm sure we should go on a few dates before the dance. Does that sound okay?" I nodded in agreement. "How about Saturday night? Let's go to the cinema at 7 o'clock and then eat pizza?" I kept nodding my head. Danny took my hands and said, "I think you're a nice guy." To this day, I continued to tell the congregation, I wonder if Danny would have invited me to the dance if she had known what a bad dancer I was. 42 years ago, for the next 3 weeks, Danny and I went on dates on Fridays or Saturdays. They were simple dates. We went to the cinema. After that, we went to eat pizza, burgers, or ice cream. Sometimes we joined classmates at a restaurant, and sometimes we were alone. Starting with the second date, we ended the evening by going to the railway tracks. At the far end of the city, there was a remote parking lot by the railroad tracks, which was a popular kissing spot. Danny loved kissing, and I loved kissing Danny. In the 2 weeks leading up to the dance, we went on dates on Friday and Saturday nights. On the second Saturday, Danny suggested that it would be more comfortable in the back seat of my old rusty Pinto. As usual, Danny was right. The back seat was very comfortable, which made kissing even more enjoyable. My mom bought and insisted that I wear a navy blue leisure suit and a white shirt with blue polka dots to the dance. I looked ridiculous. Danny said I was the best dressed, and she was proud to be dating me. She was wearing a floor-length pink off-the-shoulder dress. She looked great and felt even better in my arms during each slow dance. I learned something about Danny that night. Not only did she love dancing, but she was also, without a doubt, the best dancer in the school gym. Her movements were not defiant. She didn't do dirty dancing. On the contrary, she looked so relaxed and contented. Every song the DJ performed seemed to have been written specifically for Danny. I think I was a typical dancer for a 16-year-old boy. I marched like a soldier to the beat of the music. I was embarrassed, and I mentally compared Danny and me as Beauty and the Beast. She looked so perfect in her movements, and I was so clumsy. During the fast dance, the discomfort disappeared. Danny moved very close and put her hand on my shoulder. The other hand was raised high in the air and swayed to the beat of the bass drum. She looked into my eyes and said, "I am so happy to be here with you." 6 times a night, popular athletes either got tired to join the dance floor or invited Danny to dance while we took a short break. Each time, Danny politely refused and said, "No, thanks. I'm saving all my dancing for my boyfriend." I had a very difficult first semester in my second year of college. It was the only time in our nearly 42-year relationship that Danny made a bad situation even worse, although, to be honest, she didn't know that I was going through a difficult time. Many in the church knew that this story had an important place in the Harrington family lore. 38 years ago, it was 2 days before I was supposed to start my sophomore year at a prestigious engineering school in Boston. 3 days earlier, Danny had left for a freshman orientation course at the University of Connecticut. My father was with me when my doctor told us the bad news. I had cancer. The good news was that we discovered the disease at an early stage and could expect successful treatment. It was the first time I saw my dad cry. He hugged me with all his might and cried against my cheek for a minute or two. His sobs scared me. Pulling himself together, Dad wiped his tears, looked into my eyes, and said, "We're going to kick some ass for leukemia." Dinner with my mom that night was just as emotional. We told her about the disease and the positive prognosis. My doctors in Hartford had arranged for a 10-week treatment to begin next week in Boston. Mom stubbornly insisted that I stay at home, but the doctors advised, and Dad agreed that living in Boston and studying would be much better than staying at home and worrying. As a family, we all agreed that we would keep my illness a secret. I didn't want Danny or other people to worry unnecessarily. Danny was just starting college, and she needed to devote time and energy to schoolwork. Cancer treatment affects patients in different ways. In my case, chemotherapy and radiation therapy made me feel sick and weak for a day immediately after each hospital visit. As soon as the irradiation procedure began, my hair began to fall out quickly, and I decided to shave my head just as quickly. Danny and I talk once a week on Tuesday nights. I waited for Danny's call and stood in the hallway, waiting for our shared dorm phone to ring. Our previous 2 conversations were strange. I couldn't figure out what problems we had, but I wasn't completely happy with our relationship. Our conversation that Tuesday didn't last long. Danny met an interesting guy, and he asked her out on a date. She wanted to go on a date with him and thought it would be better if we broke up. We were young. We need to meet other people. We could still be friends. We had a whole life ahead of us, and we could meet again sometime in the future. The radiation has been bothering me for the last couple of weeks. Danny's stunning story knocked the shit out of me. 2 weeks, I said to myself. If I can make it through the next 2 weeks, keep up with schoolwork, and finish radiation therapy, I'll have a 5-day Thanksgiving vacation to get my strength back. Thanksgiving was wonderful. My mom's family gathered at her childhood home near Albany, New York. The family was shocked to see my big white bald spot, and even more so to learn that I was fighting cancer. Fortunately, I was able to share the news that the tests I took earlier this week showed that I was in remission and on the way to a full recovery. When we returned at 10:30 on Thanksgiving evening, there were 3 messages from Danny on our home answering machine. My mom noticed. "It looks like she's insisting that you call her tonight." I was about to tell my mom that I would call her back the next day when the phone rang again. Dad laughed and said, adamant and persistent. I went to the phone. "Hello. Didn't you get my messages?" "Listen, Danny." We just walked in the door. Before I could say anything else, Danny intervened. "I'm so sorry, and I love you. I promise that nothing happened. I didn't do anything inappropriate with that jerk. I promise. I love you so much and miss you." "I miss you too, Danny. Can we meet tomorrow?" "I don't want to wait until tomorrow. Please come tonight." "You are welcome. We can watch a movie. I want to be with you." When I hesitated, Danny continued, "I know I've been terrible to you, and I'm ashamed. I need you, and I want to be with you. Please come. I'm going to take a shower and change, and then drive over. I'll be at your place at 11:15. Do me a favor. Come to the car so we can talk in private. My mom and dad miss you too, and my sisters think I'm the stupidest fool in the world because I broke up with you. Please come into the house. I promise I'll see them tomorrow. Please come to the car tonight." Danny was already halfway to the driveway when I pulled up to her house and parked the car. She was skipping along. Her smile was ear to ear, and she looked radiant. When she opened the door and got into the car, I took off the baseball cap I was wearing to hide my bald spot. Danny froze with her mouth open when she saw me. "I have been very ill for the last few months. I wanted to talk to you about this before I see your family." Danny groaned and threw herself through the console of the car into my arms. She was crying harder than my father had a few months earlier, and I almost suffocated in her arms. Our conversation lasted about half an hour, but did not arouse much interest from anyone. I was talking, and Danny was crying. I noticed the curtains moving in her house, and I knew that her family was watching us. When the front door opened and Danny's father came out, I said, "Your dad is coming out to check on you." Mr. Wilson was standing at the passenger door of the car when Danny rolled down the window. "Is everything all right, honey?" Danny started nodding her head, and then she started crying. Mr. Wilson leaned over and looked at me from across the cabin. He was angry and was going to attack me until he got a good look at me. "Chris, are you okay?" I smiled back at Mr. Wilson, shrugged my shoulders, and said, "My girlfriend came back to me, and I beat leukemia, and all this in 1 week. I would say that I'm doing great." Our wedding was the same as many others, and at the same time completely unique. Most of the 230 people who watched Danny and I exchange wedding vows were scattered around the church. 35 years ago. Who the hell is planning a wedding for the end of February? Especially in the Northeast. I thought about it over and over again throughout our 8-month engagement. Our wedding day turned out to be bright and sunny, and the temperature at 8 in the morning was minus 18 degrees. When I swore for the 10,000th time and started complaining, my mom intervened. "Hush," she snapped. "It's Danny's day, and there's no way you're going to ruin it." Do we understand each other 100%? Over the years, I've heard the phrase, "I'm out of breath," many times. I didn't realize what that meant until I saw Danny standing next to her father at the end of the church aisle. I was stunned and speechless. Suddenly, the cold weather didn't matter anymore. Our wedding day was perfect. When the music of the wedding march started playing and Danny and her father took the first steps down the aisle towards me, I wondered what I had done that the Lord had blessed me with such a special woman. My college roommate stood up for me, and his toast gave everything a perfect perspective when he started. "I would like you to join me and drink to my best friend and him." My best friend. The wedding reception was set up to perfection. Everyone threw a ball, and I suspect that a few of our underage cousins went a little overboard with the fun. Danny and I changed into casual clothes, and we're going to move to a quiet hotel room on the other side of the county. I met Danny outside the bridal changing rooms. We were going to walk down the hall to the stairs and then go down to the reception to say goodbye. Danny looked at me and asked, "Will you promise not to be mad at me, Mr. Harrington?" I laughed and said, "Don't tempt me, wife. I'm counting on a loud fight on my wedding day. I'm having so much fun. Is it time for us to leave?" An hour and a half later, we were dancing in the middle of the dance floor surrounded by family and friends when the bartender informed us that this was the last dance. An hour later, we arrived at my parents' house for an after-party and stayed there until the end. We got to our hotel room at 3 in the morning, undressed when we got to bed, and a few moments later fell asleep in each other's arms. We celebrated our wedding by waking up later that morning. The last thing I remember was, "I love you, my husband." Danny and I had just started a new career when we got married. We didn't have enough time to spend our honeymoon. Our first vacation together took place 3 years later. We went on a 10-day hike to Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. People in the church showed interest in my story. 32 years ago, there were 14 people in the group, including our guide Greta. She was going to take us on a 250-kilometer hiking trip that would take us to many of the most popular places on the southwestern edge of the national park. Every night we were going to spend the night in very simple houses built around the park. We took food with us, as well as fishing gear. Streams, rivers, and lakes in Grand Teton National Park abounded with trout. On the third day of the hike, we reached a fork in the trail. Greta told us that if we continued on our way, we would reach a cliff overlooking one of the largest nesting sites of the American bald eagle in our country. From the cliff, the group could look down at the treetops and see the eagle's nests. If we had gone left, we would have ended up in a valley along one of the most famous trout streams in the state. We voted. The result was 1 in 12 for the fact that we will see the eagle's nests. Greta did not vote. I asked, "Is there any reason why I can't go fishing in the valley? I'll stay the night and meet the group at the next house tomorrow night." Greta replied, "We talked about it before we left. At least 2 people should go together if we split up." As I expected, Danny said, "I was hoping that there would be other fishermen in our group." I know Chris wants to go fishing on this river. I'll go with him. Danny and I had an amazing day. We did not see the nests of bald eagles, as they were hidden in the treetops, but we saw dozens of beautiful birds that hunted fish along the river. By the middle of the day, we found our hut. Danny unpacked our gear, and I went with my fishing gear to the river. The fishing was exciting, and I brought 2 large rainbow trout for dinner. Later that night, as we snuggled into our double sleeping bag, Danny whispered, "Sing me a song." You know I can't sing. Her lips touched mine, and then she begged, "Please." I gave up and sang softly in her ear to the tune of the lullaby Mockingbird. "Hush, baby, don't say a word. Dad will buy you a mockingbird." When I stopped, Danny said, "Go on. I want more." "I'm sorry, baby. I do not know the rest of the words. Use your wonderful imagination and sing to me." I don't know why I chose mockingbird. It just occurred to me. I thought for a second or two and continued with invented words. "If the mockingbird doesn't sing, Dad's going to beat up old Uncle Pete." Danny's giggle started somewhere deep in her stomach, and she trembled softly as we hugged each other. "When old Uncle Pete, he'll drop dead. Dad will do somersaults in our huge bed. Danny and I have made love hundreds of times." Danny and I got up at first light. I caught another trout, and we ate it for breakfast. Having dismantled the campsite, we walked almost 25 kilometers together until we met with the rest of our group in a nearby cabin. Like every night, Danny and I slept together in our huge double sleeping bag. I do not know how long I slept when Danny poked me in the side until she woke me up. Our room was filled with the whole company, so I quietly whispered, "What's the matter?" When Danny answered, I realized she was crying. "You'll think I'm crazy." I kissed her gently on the lips and said, "It's too late, baby. I've known for a long time that you're crazy." "What happened?" "You got me pregnant last night. We're gonna have a girl." "How could you?" Danny interrupted me and said, "I just know, and I'm so happy." I continued our story in a church full of people. 8 months and 27 days later, on April 2nd, 1986, the first of 2 great gifts from God came. 31 years ago. The first surprise was that soon after Danny's admission, a doctor entered the delivery room. She asked if it was possible to assign a student to supervise the birth of Danny and our child. Danny agreed without hesitation. A few minutes later, Adonis entered the room and introduced himself as Mike. He was 185 centimeters tall, with the figure of an NFL linebacker and the face of a model. "Is this a medical student?" I wondered, looking at this, and a jealous lump twisted in my stomach. Alice, the nurse attached to us, helped Danny put her feet in the stirrups at the foot of the bed. I watched Alice explain to Mike from a physiological point of view what he sees and how everything will change as the birth progresses. My face turned red, and I started to get angry. One look from Danny, and she knew exactly what I was thinking. "You've got to be kidding," she almost shouted. Danny scared Alice, Mike, and me. We all looked at her, and I suspect Mike and Alice breathed a sigh of relief when Danny looked at me. "What are you thinking about? Do you really think I'm in the mood to try, Mike?" Alice started giggling when Danny looked at Mike. "Come on, handsome, in front of my husband. You need to hurry up because the baby may be born any minute." Alice's giggle turned into a low, throaty laugh. Mike was amused, but he was watching me closely. Danny shook her head and said, "You're so dumb." I sighed, gave up, and said, "I need to get some fresh air. Does anyone want coffee?" After receiving Alice's order, I went out into the hallway. Mike was walking a step behind and asked, "Chris, if you're uncomfortable with me, I can leave." I waved Mike off before he could finish and said, "I'm a jealous idiot. Don't worry about it." 7 hours later, a second surprise awaited us. Alice called the doctor. After examining Danny, the doctor smiled and calmly told us, "We are going to give birth to your child by cesarean section, and we will do it right now." The orderlies and nurses filled the ward, and each of them followed the prescribed emergency protocol. Alice's job seemed to be to calm me down and not get in the way. A minute later, Danny's bed was wheeled out of the delivery room and into the operating room. While the ambulance crew took care of Danny and our baby, Alice gave Mike and me medical clothes. When we entered the operating room, the doctor quickly looked up and said, "Your wife and child are fine." He went back to work, and 30 seconds later, I heard a baby crying. I watched as one nurse handed our baby to a second nurse, who quickly washed our daughter, wrapped her in a pink blanket, and handed her to me. My legs gave way when I looked at the most beautiful girl who has ever been born. Mike pulled a wheelchair over to me and supported me while I sat holding my daughter in my arms. Crazy thoughts were spinning in my head as I wondered how I would be able to raise my precious daughter alone if something happened to Danny. As if reading my thoughts, the doctor, without looking up from his work, said, "We're finishing up. Your wife will come to her senses in the next few minutes. We'll get her back to the ward soon." Half an hour later, Wendy and I were reunited with Danny. Her surgeon and obstetrician-gynecologist were at Danny's bedside and explained why they gave birth to Wendy by cesarean section and what precautions Danny needs to take soon while she recovers from surgery. Wendy was wrapped in my arms, just as she was in the first minutes after her birth. When the doctors finished the briefing, her midwife asked, "Do you have any questions, Danny?" "I don't have any questions, but I want to say something." She looked at me, smiled, sobbed, and begged, "Please let me hold my baby." Those of you who know me better can describe me as a straightforward person. I don't worry about difficult conversations with people. For better or worse, I immediately dive into it. I caught a few nods of approval from the people in the church. 18 months earlier, one of the Fridays was one of the longest and most unpleasant days of my life. Wendy, her husband David, and their children arrived at our Cape Cod summer home late in the morning. Julie and her fiancé Bob arrived an hour later. We had a delicious lunch together. After that, we changed into swimsuits and went to the beach. Danny and I took our grandchildren, Scott and Mike, for a long walk along the shore. On the way home, we stopped for fresh lobsters and steamed ones, as well as other products for roasting lobsters. The men, Bob, David, Mike, Scott, and I, built a fire to cook the food. We lit a good fire, and when the water in a large lobster pot boiled, we dipped the potatoes into it and let it brew for 15 minutes. Corn on the cob was next, and after the water boiled for the third time, my grandchildren added clams and lobster. I liked the nervous squeals of the boys when the lobsters hit the sides of the pan seconds before they died. We had dinner together at our huge picnic table, and by the end of a great dinner, everyone was happy. The girls opened the third bottle of red wine. By then, we had moved the party into the house. Wendy put the boys to bed at 10, and when she returned to the kitchen table, she brought a bottle of my bourbon and a bottle of Danny's tequila, as well as 6 glasses. When Bob said he preferred bourbon, Wendy poured a glass for Bob and me, and then a glass of tequila for Julie, David, Danny, and herself. "Your health." Wendy raised her glass, and we all toasted. When Wendy put her glass on the table, she turned to her mother and asked, "What the hell is going on, Mom?" "What do you mean?" Danny asked. "Give us a break, Mom." Julie broke in. "The blood vessel on Dad's head is expanding and looks like it's about to burst. It's been throbbing since we arrived." "Wendy's done. We know that something is wrong. One of you? Tell me." It was Danny's show. She took another big sip of courage liqueur and then told her daughters, "I have cancer. Things are not going well." We talked and cried for hours. Danny answered every conceivable question from girls and boys. My daughters were greatly comforted by their mother's solemn promise to fight the disease with all her might. As midnight approached, I excused myself and went out onto the porch. I wanted to clear my head and admire the ocean view. Just a few minutes later, music started playing in the house. I turned and looked out the living room window. Danny, Wendy, and Julie danced together. Fortunately, our daughters inherited their dancing abilities from their mother. With tears in my eyes, I watched the girls sway to the beat of the song. I was grateful to them for looking so happy. After 4 or 5 songs, Danny danced to the door, opened it, and went out onto the veranda. The music followed her as she slowly and sensually swayed, twisted, and spun, approaching me. Danny came very close and put her arm around my shoulders. She raised her other hand high in the air and swayed to the beat of the song. It reminded me of our first dance together, which took place many years ago. She looked into my eyes and confirmed it once again. "I'm so happy to be here with you." Our kiss lasted a very long time. Danny spent 4 days in hospice at our house. We were given strong painkillers to make Danny feel as comfortable as possible. A week earlier, for the better part of 4 days, Danny was in and out of consciousness. A constant stream of people came to us to say goodbye. My father passed away, but my mother was constantly at Danny's bedside. Similarly, Danny's mom and dad were in our house from dawn to dusk. Danny's sisters and their families came to visit us every day. Wendy and Julie took turns helping me with the most necessary things to take care of their mom. On the third day of my stay at the hospice, at about 11:30 in the evening, I sat by our bed and read. The house was quiet. I heard a hoarse hello. When I looked up, I saw that Danny was staring at me intently. She was talking to me. I could tell by the mischievous smile and the glint in her eyes that Danny was sane and fully aware of her surroundings. "Hi, honey." Her smile widened as she said, "My name is Danny Wilson Harrington. I am very glad that you went dancing with me at the winter carnival." I climbed into bed and hugged Danny. "I'm grateful," I told the audience. "I am very grateful that Danny was able to quietly leave her life surrounded by her family in the bedroom that we shared." End.